Good morning, Central Kentucky. This is Sandra Leslie White coming to you from WJMM Studios here just outside of Lexington, Kentucky. Shouting out to all of you around the country, WJMM.com and Facebook. Good morning. Hey, have you ever had a meltdown? Have you ever had a meltdown? Had a meltdown or two. My children have had meltdowns. Yeah, meltdowns are just, I think, a part of life when we just have had enough. We're just drained and, just one more little something that pushes us over the edge and we just lose it. We have a meltdown. Well, kind of the greatest depiction for me of a meltdown was in Wizard of Oz. Do you remember when the Wicked Witch of the West finally had her final meltdown? I love that scene. The Wicked Witch is dead. Anyway, so the meltdown is either a good thing, for a good person, a meltdown, in the presence and the power of God is a good thing. The meltdown of the wicked, like the Wicked Witch of the West, that's a good thing. Meltdowns are good, ultimately, if they are in Christ. So let's look at that today. Do you think God could ever have a meltdown? Does he have a meltdown? Well, let's look at that too today in Hosea chapter 4, verse 6. We're still unpacking that power verse, the probably key verse for the whole book of Hosea is found in Hosea 4, 6. So let's look at that this morning again out of the New American Standard Version. My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I will also reject you from being my priest. Since you have forgotten the law of your God, I will also forget your children. Okay, this is not a pleasant verse. Coming to you, though, this morning from WJMM 99.1 Life-Changing Radio. This could be a life-changing verse for you this morning, and we're going to talk about meltdowns. And why are we talking about meltdowns? I've looked at this verse, I've studied this verse, I continue to study this verse, and the one thing that really bothered me about this verse was that Yahweh and or Hosea are speaking here about my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. We've talked about that quite a bit. You can check out those messages on my Facebook page, Sandra Leslie White Ministries, if you're interested. All my shows are archived there. Because you have, he says then in the second sentence of verse 6, rejected knowledge. So I want to look at that word rejected, because then he goes on to say, I will also reject you from being my priest. We talked about the kingdom of priest in a previous show, that is all of God's people, my priest, representative of all of his people, representative of the northern kingdom, which this prophecy was written primarily to, but also including the southern kingdom, all of Israel, all of God's people who are being drained, essentially, of the knowledge of God, the presence of God, the passion of God, the reality of Yahweh, because of the influence of false gods in their lives. So I want to look at this word rejected because I didn't like it. I didn't understand it. You have rejected knowledge. Well, okay, that just sounds like on the surface that you've just turned away from the knowledge of God in the land, that deep, abiding relationship and knowledge of who he is with all your senses, and you have just rejected that. Well, I looked into this word, rejected, and I was just shocked at the meaning, which is why the show is called Meltdown. I think I had a mini meltdown looking at this, and I kept looking at it and making sure it was a correct reference. I looked into the Hebrew dictionary. I looked into the lexicon. I looked into Strong's. lexical aids. I really dug into this. So, because I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe what at least my favorite Hebrew and Greek scholar, Spiros Soriades, whose Bible translation I use primarily for lifting the veil, he identified or referenced this word rejected in a Hebrew word which is pronounced, I'm going to spell it first, M-A-A-C, ma'as. We want to go there. It means to melt, to feel undone, to melt away, to dissolve. It has the sense of flowing or running out. It is similar to our concept of feeling drained. All right, if you're just tuning in, this is Sandra Leslie White. Are you feeling drained? Are you about to have a meltdown? The title of today's show. This word, rejected, really finds its deeper meaning, which we look for in lifting the veil, the deeper revelation of God's word. And this is so important because you have been drained of knowledge. Okay, so backing up, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. Well, it's because they've been drained of knowledge, drained of the knowledge of God. Are you feeling drained of the presence, the passion, the purpose of God in your life? Are you drained of this? You're on your way to a meltdown if you are feeling drained. Then he goes on to say, I would reject you, so I'm drained too. You know, and so it seems to me anyway that Yahweh, through Hosea, and perhaps Hosea being a prophet, he's certainly drained of being married to a wayward wife, Gomer, who gets wooed and loved and restored by God, and she runs back to her old ways. And oh my goodness, and he's got to go back after her. That's chapter 3. And this whole thing is grounded and rooted in a powerful love that pursues us regardless of our own behavior. But in this verse, it is so interesting to me that this idea of being drained of knowledge, I, meaning Hosea and Yahweh together, they're very intricately entwined with one another's voices in the book of Hosea. I also will be drained of you from being my priest. Since you've forgotten the law of your God, I'll forget your children. Okay. Oh, this is so terrible. I'm like, okay. So rejection, has a far stronger connotation. I mean, just clear sense of completely being thrown away, rejected. You rejected the knowledge of God, and he's going to reject you. So this just sounded way too severe to me. But when I looked at that root word, ma'as, I look at this very differently. That root word meaning to melt down, to be flowing out, to be drained of the knowledge of God. This also seems to cause God to be drained of his people at this point. Look, he has been all about, and all the prophets, and you know this, all the prophets are all about the words of God, the warnings of God, the ways of God, getting his people back on track. And he becomes weary of our ways. Yeah, he does. He does. We are made in his image. He is extremely relational. He's very emotional in Hosea. That's what I love about him. I mean, he's so passionate in the book of Hosea. He's very personal. He goes in and out of this prophet's voice, but he is extremely real to us in Hosea. And today, the reason that his people are destroyed for this lack of knowledge is because they are being drained of it. They are being melted down. They're about to experience a total meltdown because they are being drained by the false gods, the false ways, the false words in the culture of the day. In that latter part of the 8th century BC, we know that the Canaanite gods were having their way with the Hebrew people. They were influencing that culture so strongly that the Hebrew people were becoming syncretistic. They were combining the ways of the Canaanite gods with the ways of Yahweh, and it was wearing them out. They were being drained. They were on the fence between, oh, shall we go the Canaanite God's way and depend on all the gods of the sun, the gods of the rain, the gods of the fields, the gods of fertility, the gods of the temple, where Gomer was apparently a prostitute along with other men and women who were there because if you had intercourse with one of the temple prostitutes in the day, you would become not only fertile in your family, but fertile in your fields. And so they were not only just entertaining, they were interacting, they were having intercourse with false gods. They were being drained of the knowledge, the intimacy, the beauty, the strength, the power of Yahweh. So this draining out, this is an amazing word, and it's translated here as rejection. But I think it's far better to look at it as a meltdown. You are slowly but surely being melted down, and you're going to lose your ways with Yahweh as you continue on with the false ways of the culture of the day. And he goes on to say, I'll reject you. I'll be drained of you. You've forgotten the law of God, and guess what? I'll forget your children. So, that to me also is an indicator of God being weary of his people, weary of our ways. And so it's almost as if he's saying, look, if you're going to forget my law completely, then your children are going to be wayward as well. There's no way that if you forget the laws of God, if you forget the presence of God, if you forget the purpose and the power and the passion of God in your own life, your children are lost. I mean, your children might as well be forgotten. But is he going to forget any of us? I think what this does here is simply tell you, and he does it throughout Hosea, he is wearied by our ways. And so I love what David wrote in Psalm 58. And I want to just go there today and in our last few minutes together. This is just the way God is and the way we are. And I don't know how he hangs in there with us at all. But listen to Psalm 58. I'm going to go to, let's see, Psalm 58 in the closing message here. 7 and 8. Let them flow away like water that runs off when he aims his arrows. Let them be as headless shafts. Let them be as a snail which melts away as it goes along, like a woman miscarries of a woman which never see the sun. Oh, I don't want to see the melting away, the meltdown of God's people. And yet our meltdown may really be what's necessary for us to be built back up into the creature we were created to be. So sometimes our meltdowns are very instrumental in God taking us, like that potter takes the clay that's shattered, that's melted down, that's off the wheel, and restores and rebuilds and renews a beautiful human being. So don't let that meltdown stop you from realizing that God's pursuing you to create something beautiful within you. God bless you today. We'll see you tomorrow.